Robby. What's on your radar?
These are some good topics. I can't wait to get to them. But first, just before the holiday commenced last week, a terrible tragedy occurred in Washington, D.C. A gunman opened fire on 2 National Guard troops just a few blocks from the White House. One was killed and another was wounded. Now is the time for thoughts and prayers for the family of the slain guardsman, whose name is Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, and for Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, who's currently fighting for his life. Thoughts and prayers for them. Yet some in the mainstream media are already pointing the blame for this hideous act of violence, not at the alleged killer who's in custody, but on the national political climate, or more specifically on the decision by President Donald Trump to deploy the Guard to D.C. in the first place. That's contemptible, it's disgusting, and it's wrong. The blameworthy party is actually, of course, the alleged shooter. Now, this suspect, who was apprehended in the immediate aftermath of the attack, is Ramanallah Lakhanwal, a native of Afghanistan who came to the U.S. in 2021 during the Biden administration. Lakhanwal is one of thousands of such people who were given high priority to come to the U.S. as American forces withdrew from Afghanistan. The administration's view was that Afghanis who aided us against the Taliban should not be abandoned to reprisals from Islamic extremists, and Lakhanwal was one such person. He, of course, worked for a unit called a so-called Zero Unit. In other words, he actually helped the CIA hunt down extremists. The decision to let him and his family come to America is thus perfectly understandable. He helped the U.S. kill bad guys in Afghanistan. Some on the right have tried to score political points by saying that insufficient vetting on the part of the Biden administration was the problem here, and the reason that a violent man got through, but it does seem to be the case that this person was vetted and was also correctly deemed eligible. His descent into madness and violence occurred after he had moved to the U.S., according to reports. He stopped talking to his children, he secluded himself in a dark room, he took sudden cross-country road trips, in this case all the way from Seattle to Washington, D.C., where he allegedly committed this appalling crime. So it does not appear to be the case that he somehow got through into the U.S. when he shouldn't have. But by the same token, it's morally appalling to say that the mere presence of the National Guard in D.C. somehow inspired or encouraged the actions of this deranged person. Yet that is precisely what some in the mainstream media are suggesting. The Atlantic's Juliette Kayyem shamefully said the tragedy was avoidable and that Trump had been warned that members of the military could be attacked. She writes, there are costs to performatively deploying members of the military, one of which is the risk of endangering them. I mean, yes, in a sense, she's correct. It is true they could be attacked. Police can be attacked too. But we aren't going to abolish the police in order to protect the cops because their job is to help keep us safe. Having no army and no police force whatsoever would reduce the specific threat of violence against such authority figures, but only hardcore leftists think that's a good idea. It would make the rest of us less safe. The New Yorker's Jane Mayer had an even worse take, writing this on X. This is so tragic, so unnecessary. These poor guardsmen should never have been deployed. I live in D.C. and watched as they had virtually nothing to do but pick up trash. It was for political show, and at what cost? First, the implication that the decision to deploy the Guard to the streets of D.C. was some reckless miscalculation that put them in harm's way is just patently absurd. But I also object to the idea that they had virtually nothing to do but pick up trash. Well, some of what the police do is just standing around. It may look like they're doing nothing to you. What they're actually doing is deterring opportunistic crime. There are fewer carjackings and shopliftings if the police are nearby. There are fewer muggings and stabbings and spontaneous fights breaking out. I live near a CBS, and there's usually a police car parked in front of it. That cop may seem like he's doing nothing. He often is doing nothing. But what he's actually doing is decreasing the likelihood that a bunch of teens will rob that store, as they had previously. Now, look, is this the right job for the National Guard? Okay, it's fine if you think they should not be deployed for that reason. Perfectly willing to have that conversation. You're free to say that. You are not free to say that the presence of the Guard has had no discernible benefit. As political strategist Logan Dobson pointed out on X, National Guard deployed to D.C. on August 11th. From August 11th through today, there have been 24 D.C. homicides. In the identical time period last year, there were 61. The National Guard have absolutely saved lives in D.C. It's an insult to say they've done nothing. Indeed, they are heroes for what they are doing. And again, our thoughts and prayers are with those who were shot and injured and killed in the recent attack.
Yeah, I think that it's important to start with that sentiment because you and I haven't talked about this. So sending, first and foremost, thoughts and prayers to Sarah Beckstrom's family, one of the National Guard members that was actually killed. But also, I read from Attorney General Pam Bondi that Sarah actually volunteered to work on the Thanksgiving holiday and raised her hand to do that, and to be killed in the line of duty, whether you think National Guards should be here or not, is to me always, and you and I agree on this often, is always the wrong time to have some politically charged conversation when we were in limbo. I know because I was filling in on the Hill on News Nation, and we didn't know if the person was alive because we were getting the wrong information from West Virginia leadership.
Right. The governor initially reported they had both been killed and had to walk that back. It's a good reminder to just hold your fire, people.
You don't need to be first. You need to be right.
Even if you're not opining anything political, just wait till we got our facts straight to say anything.
Exactly.
Is a good lesson.
And I think with families on edge, knowing how many different people were deployed in the National Guard all over D.C. and not knowing the names of the people, for a tweet like that to go out from leadership was unfortunate. But just the entire circumstance of what happened over was supposed to be a beautiful time of coming together is tragic. At the same time, the president's response to send up to 500 more troops to D.C., I don't think is the correct response. And not because there should be some fear from our National Guard of coming to D.C., a place where the president has jurisdiction possibly to make that decision. We know he's in the middle of a case right now where it was deemed illegal for him to have National Guard on the street, and they're waiting until December 11th to move forward, giving his team a chance to appeal that decision. But the National Guard are reservist troops that come here. And so you said you're welcome to having the conversation about them being here and what they actually do. I mean, they have limited power and they can't even enforce any laws. They can't make arrests. And so, yes, the presence, I will agree with you. Seeing them as somebody who moves around D.C. very freely now, whether I'm driving or taking the train, seeing them actually makes me feel protected and safe, and I'm sure other people scared to do any actions they might think otherwise.
Disincentivizing bad public behavior.
Certainly.
That's what their presence is doing.
But understanding the actual role of what a reservist troops look like and actually can do, a criminal who wants to move forward will know, well, they can't technically be tackled and taken down and arrested by a National Guard member. And so that might not deter them.
Well, they can be tackled and taken down, and then they can be detained.
They can call the other
police to come arrest them.
Yeah, but if they run away, it's like, what do we do? Like, what are the exact parameters? Which is why when you bring in federal...
If they run away, they're going to get chased and tackled and detained until... Look, but my point is, it is offensive to say that Trump... You might think this is not a good use of their time and that we shouldn't send more troops. That's perfectly fine. I to some extent, agree with that. But it's like inviting attacks on them, like we're sending them to Afghanistan or something. That, yes, involving American troops in Africa, in the Middle East, I'm against that because it does invite attacks on them. Not in our own country, not on the streets of D.C. This isn't the third world. This is not inviting attacks on them, and I'm offended by those tweets from liberal media people who suggested that it was somehow the government's fault for putting them in harm's way. That's not what's happening here.
Robby, what's on your radar?
Let's get to it. Now, the mainstream media has finally caught on to the fact that Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who, by the way, was for some reason Kamala Harris's choice to be the Veep, is complicit in ignoring a massive welfare fraud scheme perpetrated in his state by largely Somalian immigrants. The New York Times is no longer ignoring this story. They covered it in a devastating report that alleges, quote, fraud swamped Minnesota's social services system on Tim Walz's watch. It's a bombshell story. Let's take one example of the fraud. A nonprofit called Feeding Our Future took government money during COVID that was supposed to go toward buying meals for hungry children. Instead, it went toward luxury cars, even real estate projects abroad. That's right, the fraudster sent American taxpayer dollars out of this country. Of the 86 people charged with the fraud, all but 8 of them were Somalians. And here's where it gets worse. According to whistleblowers, state agents were tacitly approving the fraud because the Somalians have become a powerful constituency in the state of Minnesota. Democrats didn't want to risk losing their support. And Tim Walz himself has admitted that these programs aired on the side of generosity during the pandemic. Well, he was very generous with your money. How nice of him. Quote, the programs are set up to move the money to the people, said Tim Walz in an interview. The programs are set up to improve people's lives, and in many cases, the criminals find the loopholes. It's like he's saying, yeah, we got scammed. Oh, well, we had good intentions. Should be noted, of course, that the New York Times did not break this story. The conservative writer and activist Christopher Rufo got to it first. But because it is a legitimate story, the mainstream media has been guilted into covering it. Now, not all liberal commentators seem to be drawing the same lessons as the New York Times, however. Here were the ladies of The View, redirecting the issue from the failings of Tim Walz to the failings of, well, I bet you can guess who.
Here's what's interesting, because if you're upset about fraud, in 2018, a judge ruled that you know who had to pay $25 million due to his fraudulent university. In February 2024, a New York judge found him, his sons, and his organization liable for fraud. Then 3 months later, he was found guilty on 34 counts of fraud.
Really, Whoopi? We can't talk about something other than something wrong a Democrat did, rather, for more than 2 seconds before you bring up Donald Trump. It's exactly this kind of blithe dismissal of real problems that have occurred under the watch of Democrats in blue states and blue cities that has caused progressive media to alienate middle America and drive them into the arms of Trump's Republican Party. If you don't think the GOP has the right policy prescriptions, make that case. But don't try to make the case that Democrats like Tim Walz can be trusted to run a city or a state or the country at large. Massive welfare fraud is his record. He let it happen on his watch, and he's still making excuses for it. Progressive governance can't survive such massive failures. Defunding the police, allowing rampant welfare abuse, taxing the wealthy so aggressively that they actually move away, that is the left progressive track record, and it's a recipe for disaster. You were chucking along with Whoopi there.
It's so funny because you get so annoyed when Whoopi brings up Donald Trump in moments that are unnecessary, but Donald Trump brings up President Biden in moments that are always unnecessary, including every time there's a failure under his watch. So I just want to make sure we're balancing the scales. I think Whoopi, as a commentator, can point out that his Trump University was...
My shoes are untied. You know who else had untied shoes? Donald Trump.
Just because she brought it up doesn't make it untrue. It was still a fraudulent university. But I just want to point out...
It's a different kind of fraud.
Oh, we're comparing scales and levels of fraud. Either way.
Yes, that is an example of the government deciding that a business arrangement between Trump Enterprises,
and people that got scammed.
No, let me finish.
Okay.
And private individuals that they got scammed. They willingly gave their money to Trump or Trump Enterprises for some purpose, and nobody made them do it, and they felt like they didn't get their money's worth. Boo-hoo. This is an example of money being stolen from the public, from taxpayers. That money is coercively collected by the government and then was given to people. Your money was taken and given to someone else for nefarious purposes. That's very different than a judge or a government agency deciding that a private transaction we make, they say is fraudulent.
Fine, but I think we can bring it up.
It's
let's stick
real
to the
fraud
point.
versus fraud.
Let's stick to the point. So in Minnesota, what happened is egregious, right? There's millions of dollars that were used for causes that were supposed to go to homelessness and other things that just didn't go there. So that is the worst kind of person doing that, and anybody who did that should be charged with a crime. My bigger issue yesterday was that Minnesota has the largest population of Somali immigrants of any state in our country. We're talking about like 25,000 people. So you said 87 people minus 8 of them are actually not Somali that were part of this. So we're talking about, because I did the math, 0.25% of the Somalis in Minnesota are committing crimes. So does that mean that we should now be targeting the entire Somali immigrant population?
I didn't say that.
No, but the president is suggesting that. And so I want to point out for PPP fraud and paycheck fraud, because Walz did respond to this. He said he didn't respond in the moment, or he responded slowly because he was trying to hand out money like everybody in leadership was, both governors, mayors, and federal government during the time of the pandemic was rushing to try to get people help. That's why we have over $200 billion of these programs that have already been abused by both Americans and people across the board. It's not good. In 2017, for example...
That's why I was against it from the beginning.
Fine, but
I said,
it happened.
don't do this.
It happened. In 2017, 26 people from the Orthodox Jewish community in Lakewood, New Jersey were arrested on charges, just like these Somali charges, of welfare and public assistance fraud. They scammed the system, all 26 of them.
I don't think that we should Why are we calling out the Jews?
We're not. I'm saying I don't think we should isolate. My point is right here. I don't think we should isolate the Orthodox Jewish community because 26 bad actors behaved badly in New Jersey. Just like I don't think we should isolate, like the president is doing, the Somali community because less than 80% of bad actors, which is 0.25% of the community there are bad actors in a certain state, and so they should not be isolated from migrating.
Okay, but I find it...
And so I don't think we should target these attacks unless you agree that then we should look at New Jersey and say what's going on there. No, it was just bad actors doing bad things that go in line with the $200 billion we're missing from these programs over the years since the pandemic, from both Americans that were committing fraudulent activities and people that were not American. These programs were flawed. We talk about that all the time, but don't point to one community and say we're going to retaliate against you when nothing was done to any other communities. And I can go on a list of other communities that have done different things.
I don't think there should be retaliation against anyone who is not accused of or convicted of a crime.
Yes.
But Trump is talking about where people will be allowed to immigrate from in the future, which is perfectly valid in my view. Also, the relevancy here is that Tim Walz's government feared the political power of this constituency and then didn't want to punish the bad actors in their midst for fear of blowback from the broader Somali community. That's in the New York Times.
Yeah, but that's not what Tim Walz is responding.
New York Times says.
Tim Walz can come speak for himself. He was on Sunday shows. I'm sure he's going to be on next Sunday shows. He said that since then he has created anti-fraud task forces. He said that he's ordered audits on all these people. So to say he's doing nothing and threw his hands up because he wanted these votes is reported by the New York Times. I'm assuming somebody on his team must have mentioned
I can't believe he was this close to being the vice president.
He literally is defending himself. And just like the president made poor choices during the pandemic, both Biden and Trump, Tim Walz is saying, that wasn't my priority to get out fraud during that
money
time.
in the first place. Thomas Massie, by the way, now number one enemy to Donald Trump. He voted against it. He was wise to do so, the CARES Act. That was a huge mistake. We've just took public money and threw it around.
Well, there's over 3,000 different defendants that are in cases right now that are U.S. residents that have defrauded the system during the pandemic. So make sure that we're also looking at everybody, all 3,000 of them, saying, who are you related to? Let's punish them too. Because that's what you're saying, or that's what the president is saying by punishing the Somali community for these bad actors.
No, he's saying there might not be as much immigration from Somalia.
Yes, but he's not doing that for any other community, and this happened across the board, is what I'm telling you, for fact. Robby, what's on your radar?
Let's get to it. She's back. Hillary Clinton is opining on a topic near and dear to her heart, the supposed misinformation spread by social media regarding all her favorite topics. This is a political figure utterly convinced she would be accepted by all the world and by American voters in particular if people stopped listening to social media and instead got all their news from the credentialed experts of the mainstream media. Recently, Clinton spoke at Israel Hayam's summit to explain why she thinks people, especially young people, many of them Jewish Americans themselves, have turned against Israel over the war in Gaza. Spoiler, she thinks it's all TikTok's fault. Let's watch.
That our students, smart, well-educated young people from our own country, from around the world, where were they getting their information? They were getting their information from social media, particularly TikTok. That is where they were learning about what happened on October 7th, what happened in the days, weeks, and months to follow. That's a serious problem. It's a serious problem for democracy, whether it's Israel or the United States, and it's a serious problem for our young people.
This is a very familiar refrain from Clinton, who, of course, when she lost the 2016 election, blamed it all on Facebook and, in particular, Russian bots that supposedly flooded the platform with pro-Trump and anti-Clinton content. It's part of the reason she concluded that Trump was an illegitimate president. Her words. People had trusted respectable news outlets. They wouldn't have fallen for the lies of social media, which are polluting our democracy, according to Clinton. Of course, what we learned subsequently is that the impacts of Russian bots on Facebook was greatly exaggerated, but never mind, Hillary Clinton has found her go-to explanation for political outcomes that she disagrees with. Here's more of her remarks in which she clearly applies the same script to declining support for Israel.
A lot of the challenge is with younger people. More than 50% of young people in America get their news from social media. So just pause on that for a second. They are seeing short-form videos, some of them totally made up.
There's so much wrong with this, I don't even know where to start. First, the idea that social media evinces some bias, whereas traditional and legacy and mainstream media does not, is just obviously false. The mainstream had their biases. It was a bias toward government action. and when it comes to foreign policy, a bias toward military intervention and against peace. Remember the Iraq War, when even liberal media largely marched in lockstep with the administration? The media has a bias toward action, and that means a bias toward interventionism. It's also the preference of the credentialed elites, whom the mainstream media relies upon. Social media, by extension, is freewheeling and encompasses many other perspectives, some of which are wrong, or biased, or malicious, sure. But look, in the year of our Lord, 2025, if you don't have a plan for your message to prevail on social media, you don't have a plan, period. Social media has won the attention wars. Most people will continue to get their news from YouTube, from TikTok, from X, from Instagram. Those platforms may change over time, as there's remarkable competition in this space, contrary to what the antitrust people say. But people are not going to go back to television and print journalism. And by the way, if they are consuming programming made available via those formats, they are likely going to be consuming them on social media. You see a lot of screenshots from magazines and clips from TV on social media. It encompasses legacy media. There's just no way of getting around it. So what I suspect people like Hillary Clinton are really mad about is that people are consuming news sources that elites do not approve of, and they are reaching conclusions elites do not agree with. The fact is that many Americans, including many Jewish Americans, disagree with U.S. taxpayers funding Israel's destruction of Gaza. They've reached that conclusion after educating themselves. That's it. That's the whole story. They're not being manipulated or tricked. It's the same story as Americans losing faith in the Iraq War or even the Vietnam War before that. The American people got tired of both of those entanglements long before U.S. policymakers and experts soured on the conflicts. So don't be mad at the messenger, Madam Secretary. If you want Americans to support your foreign policy, you have to sell it better. Stop whining about TikTok or about other social media sites and get in the game, girl. By the way, if you're interested in how social media and big tech are impacting society and free speech, and you happen to live in Washington, D.C., I'm participating in a debate next week sponsored by my colleagues at Reason Magazine. You can go online for tickets. It's going to be me and Elizabeth Nolan Brown at Reason versus Ryan Grimm and Emily Jashinsky of Breaking Points, whom longtime viewers will remember from their days on Rising Fridays. Should be a great event, and it will appear, of course, on YouTube after it's filmed.
I'm excited for this event. That's going to be very, feisty debate. To talk about Hillary, I think...
Hillary. Dear old Hillary.
I like how you said girl. But translation to me of what she's saying is like, okay, you're not seeing what you're seeing, right? Because people online were just, you are seeing what you're seeing. And I think...
They were seeing images of dead kids, and they're rebelling against it. I'm sorry. Sorry they're seeing that. Nobody likes it.
And I think the context is important here, right? Hillary Clinton, and I don't know the long history of everything she said in her relationship directly to Israel. Like we saw the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, in Israel. And when he was recently visited, he had all the nicest things to say, but it was the audience. She is at a summit called the Israel Hayam Summit.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand the context that everything she's going to say is going to be largely positive in relation to that.
Yeah.
I don't think she would even go on that stage and criticize Netanyahu, which could be a thought that's in her head, because a lot of people worldwide have criticized his decisions in regards to this particular conflict. But I do think that I completely disagree with her, because when I first got into journalism and started producing for television, it was around the Arab Spring, which was around 2010, and there was a huge rising of people in the Middle East, and we watched that play out. And that was one of the first times that Twitter was blowing up, because it was like citizen journalism. People getting out there and showing us what was going on over there, and people finding ways to meet up outside of their news organizations that may stifle them, and found ways to protest and change what they wanted to see happen. And so I think by watching that, especially as a journalist, we no longer had to rely on a few sources to figure out what was going on internationally. We could look at people real time live streaming or showing things on TikTok, on X at the time, or Twitter, and we were informed that way and would vet it. And I think it's a conduit to find more information. Of course, it's up to the magazines, newspapers, mainstream outlets, and even bloggers, podcasters, whoever's putting out information, to try to thoroughly vet their stuff if they want to be a trusted source. But the fact that there are more citizen journalists out there, it's how we are allowed to see what's really happening. It's how, when we go and talk about protests happening within our own country, or whether or not ICE incidents are getting out of control, we literally have videos now from people that were there, and then it's our job to vet them and find out if it's true, find out the person that filmed it, and figure out the context of it all. But I don't think that's a bad thing, and shutting that down is certainly not going to change the ways that people consume the information. They'll just find another way to put it out there.
She's still bitter about losing her election. She thinks it's because you got confused on Facebook. She still thinks that. And it's just not People blaming social media is, I mean, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I think that's really you're covering for some other insecurity, really. And that's her problem. She's just been rejected by the American people. Wasn't because they were confused, wasn't because they didn't know what they were getting. They just didn't want what she was offering.
Well,
Sorry.
Ever since the Arab Spring that I brought up, the algorithm has changed. And now it's very much stifled in a way that it wasn't, because now there are people that have gotten involved to argue your point about making sure the content that we see is more streamlined. Mm-hmm. But there still are things that can't be contained.
Yeah.
When the world is watching something and 72,000 people die in Gaza, there's no way that you can block people from finding that out. Robby, what is on your radar today?
Can't wait to get to all of that. But first, denial is not just a river in Egypt. It's also a recurring segment on The View. Yesterday, the ladies discussed the Tim Walz welfare scandal, which has become a very big story indeed. It turns out that 80 or 90 people, most of them Somalian, stole $1 billion in welfare funds from the public, and the state's governor, Walz, ignored whistleblower reports that something was amiss, possibly because Walz and other top Democrats did not want to alienate Somali voters, since they're a big constituency in the state. Walz, of course, was Kamala Harris's pick for Veep, a choice that speaks to the, shall we say, very, very short vetting window. One might have thought that Democrats or Republicans would have noticed the welfare fraud story, but national media has only seized on it following an expose by conservative writer Christopher Rufo. But I digress. While many Americans are outraged by these revelations, the ladies of The View think that the right is merely directing hatred towards Somalians, akin to Trump and Vance's criticisms of Haitians. Let's take a look.
Every time that happens, he pulls out a race card. Mm-hmm. Last time it was the Haitians who were eating the pets, and now it's the Somalis in Minnesota, who, by the way, there's only 84,000 Somalis in Minnesota, and 58% of them were born in the United States.
Yeah. And 87% of them are naturalized citizens.
Yeah. But one of my spies told me that he lost support with the Somali Minnesota voters over the Biden administration's handling of Gaza. So again, it's personal. Everything's personal with him.
Look, I'm sorry, but the story's nothing like the Haitian pet-eating story, which was, in fact, largely made up. It was wrong and shameful for national Republicans to echo it. This story, though, it's not made up. It's very, very real and very serious. Now, like the Haitian story, it would absolutely be wrong to engage in crude racial stereotyping about Somalians, the vast majority of whom committed no crimes. But the story itself is real, and it's damning. And it is a true indictment of Tim Walz's governance. That's where I want to focus, and that's where Republicans should keep it. To the GOP, I say, please avoid the tendency to paint with a broad racial brush. As conservative radio host Eric Erickson wrote on X, GOP, Christopher Rufo has handed you an 80-20 issue with the Somali fraud story, and the Democrats are now circling the wagons. Don't screw it up. By the way, making it a race issue will screw it up. I agree with him, indeed. There are already some signs this issue could get screwed up, as MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell has now indicated he wishes to run for governor against Mike Walz. Mike Lindell is, to put it nicely, very nicely, too extreme to win a general election. The GOP would like to run on a platform of good governance and repairing the damage to Minnesota that has occurred under Walz's watch. Then they'll need a sane, moderate, experienced candidate, not a conservative media bomb thrower. Please take note, GOP. Please listen to me this time. You usually don't, but I'd like it if you considered it this time.
So I want to start from the top. I know that you love to criticize the ladies at The View, my friends.
Your
but
friends.
I think
I know I do. Where's Alyssa been?
Well, she's pregnant, so I'm assuming maybe she's taking a minute.
Good for her. Congratulations.
So the president at a cabinet meeting called Somali people garbage. Mm-hmm. And so you acting like we should just skip over that racist part of the conversation is problematic, right?
I said we should not engage in it.
Yeah, no, but the president engaged in it. So for them not to address it is not appropriate for the type of show they have. They have discussion on why this can go left based on historically how the president
has. It's not like
has.
the Haitian story, which was just a false accusation.
Yes, which is
these accusations are true.
Fine, so separate the two, but we can discuss that the president used ridiculous language to describe an entire community that's inappropriate, right? Saying garbage, right? That we can both agree on that, if you would like to agree. But separately from the story, that has been my biggest concern, that we want to demonize an entire community for what would be, I brought up the numbers yesterday, 0.25% of the entire Somali population in the U.S. So the representation of people that committed fraud in Minnesota doesn't even represent 1% of the Somali migrants in the U.S. But I want to talk
about not a significant percentage of Somalians committed fraud.
Yes.
But a significant percentage of people who committed fraud were Somalians.
In this particular situation. So according to CBS, this case was part of a larger scale trend that was happening during the pandemic. If we're talking about the $250 million that people were involved in, I think about 70 of the 80 people we're talking about were involved in this case that was COVID-19 fraud and was collecting funds inappropriately and using them the wrong way. But during the pandemic, you said that we won't have like $1 billion here to account for. 250 million of that is this biggest fraud case they were looking into years ago during the pandemic. Across the U.S., almost $1 trillion, CBS is reporting, was lost due to fraud. It breaks my heart too.
My heart.
So it was a terrible time. And when you think about what Minnesota people were doing, it's not this anomaly that was happening in Minnesota and that's it. It was literally like across the country, unfortunately, people were committing fraud and they all should be prosecuted. And many of these people in the fraud case that was happening during the pandemic have been prosecuted. And Walz has laid out all the ways that he's pursued these people and said at the time of the pandemic, it wasn't the right time for him to go worry about fraud when he was worried about trying to save people and following what the orders were coming from above.
I would like my governors to always be worried about fraud and like...
Yeah, but it's easy to say in a moment of a...
Well, that's where I want to focus.
International pandemic.
I think that reflects a really bad governance on his part. It's like we'll ask questions later. No, you got to ask questions now.
But he wasn't the only one. Across the country, fraud was happening. We said $1 trillion was lost. So blame every single Republican and Democratic governor that didn't do a good job at accounting for the fraud from U.S. and international individuals. Now, I'll give you that Tim Walz has a response for COVID that I'll accept because of the unprecedented times. But there are recent accounts, as recent as this summer, where new fraud was happening in Minnesota that I looked into from reading this article.
Well, he's still the governor.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. And so he cannot use that excuse.
He's going for a third term.
And he can't use that excuse that it was unprecedented times. There's actual stuff that happened in September and August that were fraud, I believe, of elderly people trying to find them housing assistance that was completely fraudulent. And so that accounts for the other people that we're talking about that's more recent. And so he has to come up with new responses other than unprecedented times, because right now and in August and September, we're not unprecedented. So he should respond to that and acknowledge that, yes, there were discrimination lawsuits that followed, which is why he might have been hesitant from Somali populations that were in this specific case.
Oh, okay, that's beautiful. They're going to commit fraud, and then if you try to call them out for that or prosecute them, they're going to say we're being discriminated.
the Feeding Our Future group had a discrimination case going towards. So you would be hesitant thinking that something is happening here where they're isolating one community.
So they're going to rob us and then weaponize our discrimination laws.
No, I think it should be thrown out. I think it should be thrown out. But that's what I'm saying. Like, all this was happening at once, which is why he might have had a slow response to the COVID incident. But the ones this summer, he should have a quick response and a quick answer as to why he wasn't looking into it. Because this issue has been boiling over for years, and just now, yes, like you said, the mainstream media is picking it up and paying attention.
Lindsay, you know that I am, by and large, a supporter of increased immigration.
Yes.
I am an outlier in that respect of people on the right.
Yeah.
People on the right want very little or no immigration at this point. And that's that's one of the more popular views of the GOP, is harsher limits on immigration. So I'm laser focused on incidents like this that I know will cause a backlash against immigration. And that is, again, that it's going to go to an 80-20 or 90-10 issue when people, I know not all of them were immigrants, but their parents immigrated here from Somalia. A substantial minority community comes here, causes great fraud, and then weaponizes our protections against discrimination to save themselves. That is going to make people want, okay, no more immigration from Africa, or no more immigration overall. And I am worried about that, because I think that would make us a poorer country, a worse off society. But that's going to take some policing of the bad actors among us so as to not poison people against immigration entirely.